Hello, and welcome to the Intuitive Ouija. Thanks for clicking on my story. Before we begin, drop your city or country in the comments. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from. The move-in was a blur of cardboard boxes and that specific, soul-deep exhaustion that comes from hauling your entire life up 3 flights of stairs. The apartment itself a neutral-toned box that promised a fresh start, all beige carpet and off-white walls that still smelled faintly of industrial bleach and new paint. A smell I initially found clean and reassuring, but would later come to associate with a kind of sterile malevolence. A scrubbed-clean emptiness that felt less like a blank slate, and more like an erasure, as if the previous occupants had been vaporized rather than simply moved out. A thought I dismissed immediately as melodramatic, a product of my tired mind and aching muscles. My girlfriend, Sarah, who is far more attuned to the atmospheres of places than I am, had remarked on it too, though in her typically gentler way, saying it felt too quiet as she stood in the middle of the living room, hugging herself as if cold, a gesture I'd seen before when she was unsettled but couldn't articulate why, and I, ever the pragmatic skeptic, had laughed it off, blaming the double-paned windows and the lack of furniture, the way sound gets swallowed by empty spaces. We'd chosen this place for its affordability and its light, the way the afternoon sun poured into the bedroom, and on that first day, surrounded by the chaos of our possessions, it still held that promise, a promise that began to curdle almost imperceptibly over the next week, starting with the Ouija board, an old cardboard novelty item I'd found buried in a box of my childhood things, a relic from a Halloween long past that Sarah had fished out with a delighted gasp, saying we had to try it, that it would be a fun way to christen the new apartment. An idea I found silly but harmless, a bit of spooky fun to break up the monotony of unpacking. So that night, after a dinner of takeout pizza eaten on the floor, we sat cross-legged in the living room, the board between us on the carpet, a single candle flickering on the mantelpiece, its dancing light casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own, the room feeling suddenly much larger and darker than it had in the daylight. I placed my fingers lightly on the heart-shaped planchette, and Sarah did the same, her fingertips cool against mine, and we giggled like kids, asking if there were any spirits present, my tone laced with irony, a performance for her benefit and my own. At first, nothing happened, just the slight tremor of our own unconscious muscle movements. And I was about to call the whole thing off when the plastic piece beneath our fingers seemed to twitch with a new intention, a deliberate slide that was too smooth, too purposeful to be us, or so it felt in that charged moment, gliding smoothly to yes. Sarah's eyes widened, a mixture of fear and excitement, and she whispered, "Is someone here with us?" And the planchette moved again, a confident glide back to the same affirmative, and I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach, my skepticism warring with a primal, lizard brain fear that something was in the room with us, a presence I couldn't see or explain. "What is your name?" I asked, my voice tighter than I intended, and the thing moved, spelling out letters with an agonizing slowness that made the air in the room feel thick and heavy, each click of the plastic against the board a tiny explosion in the silence. Watching. A chill, sharp and immediate, ran down my spine, a physical reaction I couldn't control, and Sarah gasped, pulling her hands away as if burned, her face pale in the candlelight. "It's just us, it's our ideomotor effect," I said quickly, trying to reclaim logic, to steady both her and my own racing heart, grabbing her hand and placing it back on the planchette, my own grip now firm, almost painful. "Where?" I demanded of the empty room, my voice challenging, and the planchette began to move again, seemingly of its own volition, a force guiding it that felt separate from the two of us, a cold intelligence that spelled out bedroom. And that was when the dread became a physical thing, a weight in the air, a constriction in my chest that made it hard to breathe. Sarah yanked her hand back for good this time, scrambling away from the board as if it were a live snake, and I followed suit, blowing out the candle and flooding the room with the harsh, antiseptic glare of the overhead light. The mundane reality of our half-unpacked boxes suddenly seeming like a fragile shield against something we couldn't understand. We spent the rest of the evening trying to laugh it off, making jokes about overactive imaginations and cheap parlor tricks. But the laughter was brittle, forced, and our eyes kept darting towards the dark hallway that led to the bedroom, a space that now felt tainted, charged with a malevolent attention. That night, we slept with the lamp on, a childish comfort we both pretended the other needed, and I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the building settling, every creak and groan amplified by my hypervigilance into the footstep of an intruder, the whisper of a spirit, my rational mind doing battle with a fear that was older than reason. The next few days were marked by a low-grade, constant anxiety, a shadow that had fallen over our new beginning. We found ourselves speaking in hushed tones, locking the bathroom door even when the other was the only one home, our movements becoming quieter, more furtive, as if we were guests in someone else's house, our sense of ownership over the space utterly shattered by those two words spelled out on a piece of cardboard. Sarah jumped at every small noise, and I, though I tried to maintain a facade of calm for her sake, felt my own nerves fraying. The skepticism I clung to starting to feel like a thin veneer over a deep well of superstition. I started noticing things I hadn't before, or perhaps I was just seeing them with new, paranoid eyes. The way the landlord, Mr. Clay, had lingered a little too long when he gave us the keys, his gaze seeming to inventory not just the apartment but us, our belongings, our lives. The fact that the bedroom was the only room that had been repainted a stark, bright white, unlike the slightly warmer tones elsewhere, a faint, almost imperceptible smudge on the white plastic casing of the smoke detector on the bedroom ceiling, a smudge that looked like a fingerprint, which I noticed one morning while lying in bed, staring up at the ceiling instead of at Sarah, trying to pinpoint the source of my unease. It was a tiny detail, meaningless, the kind of thing you see and instantly forget, a minor flaw in an otherwise clean object. But it stuck in my mind, a burr of observation that my conscious brain filed away as irrelevant even as some deeper, more vigilant part of me kept bringing it back to the surface. The planchette's message echoed in my head, a relentless loop, watching. Bedroom. It felt less like a ghostly warning, and more like a taunt, a pinpoint accurate description of the feeling that had taken root in me. The sensation of unseen eyes following my every move, especially in that room, the place where we were most vulnerable, most intimate. Days bled into a week, and the initial shock faded into a persistent, humming dread, a background radiation of fear that colored everything, making us irritable and distant with each other, our relationship strained by the shared, unspoken terror we were both trying to deny. I began to study the bedroom with a detective's intensity, my eyes scanning the walls, the vents, the light fixtures, looking for anything out of place, any hint of a hidden lens. My rational mind now fully on board with the possibility of a human threat, a possibility that was in many ways more terrifying than a supernatural one, because it was real, it was plausible, it was something that happened in the world. And my gaze kept returning to that smoke detector, its bland, utilitarian presence suddenly seeming suspect, its placement just a fraction too angled towards the bed, not straight down as one might expect, a discrepancy so minute that it was easily dismissed. But I couldn't dismiss it anymore, not with the feeling of eyes on the back of my neck every time I changed my clothes. The culmination came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Sarah was at work, and I had called in sick, the lack of sleep and constant anxiety having taken a tangible toll on me. And I stood in the middle of the bedroom, rain streaking the window, and I looked up at that smoke detector, the white plastic eye in the ceiling, and I knew, with a certainty that was as cold and solid as ice, that I had to know. I dragged a chair from the kitchen, my heart hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of fear and grim resolution, the wooden legs screeching on the hardwood floor, a sound that seemed blasphemously loud in the silent apartment. Standing on the chair, I was now face to face with the device, my hands trembling as I reached up, expecting at any moment to hear a key in the lock, for Mr. Clay to walk in and catch me in the act, a thought that terrified me more than anything I might find. The casing was held on by a simple twist mechanism, and I gripped it, my fingers slipping with sweat, and turned. It clicked, and the cover came away in my hands, and there it was, nestled right beside the actual smoke alarm components. A tiny, sophisticated camera lens, no bigger than a pinhead, its dark eye staring back at me, a compact battery pack, and a wireless transmitter wired neatly alongside it. The world didn't slow down, it stopped. The air left my lungs in a rush, and a cold, nauseating wave of violation washed over me, so profound and absolute that my legs almost gave way. The Ouija board had been right, but it hadn't been a ghost. It had been me, my own subconscious, the part of my brain that had registered that faint smudge, that slight off-angle placement, the part that never sleeps, the ancient sentinel that had seen the predator's trap and had used the only language it could to warn my conscious self, a language of symbols and fear, a seance becoming a desperate internal memo. I carefully, methodically, twisted the cover back into place, my movements slow and deliberate, a strange calm descending over me, the calm of knowing the worst was true. I didn't call Sarah. I couldn't bear to tell her over the phone. Instead, I called the police, my voice eerily steady as I explained to the dispatcher that I believed my landlord had installed a hidden camera in my bedroom. And within 20 minutes, 2 officers were there, their presence a bulwark of reality against the surreal nightmare I was living. When I showed them the camera, their professional demeanors shifted, their eyes hardening, and they immediately secured the apartment, calling for a detective and a forensics team. They advised us not to confront Mr. Clay, and when they brought him to the apartment under the pretense of a reported water leak, his face, when he saw the police technicians carefully removing the smoke detector, crumpled from feigned concern into a mask of sheer, panicked guilt, a look more horrifying than any ghostly visage could ever be. The subsequent investigation revealed a hard drive in his basement apartment, filled with footage not just of us, but of the tenants before us, a library of stolen intimacy, of private moments that should never have been seen by anyone else, a violation so deep and pervasive it felt like a stain on my very soul. The Ouija board said we were being watched in our own home. It was right. The entity we were communicating with wasn't a spirit from the great beyond. It was the most intelligent, observant part of myself, the part that notices the barely perceptible, the part that connects dots the conscious mind hasn't even seen. And it saved us, using a child's toy as a medium, because my rational mind had blocked every other path. We moved out the next day, leaving most of our things behind. The idea of taking any part of that violated space with us unbearable. And now, months later, in a different city, in an apartment we checked for cameras with a professional's thoroughness, the horror hasn't left me. It's not the fear of the supernatural that haunts my dreams, but the terror of the real, the knowledge that the monsters are human, that they hide in plain sight, and that the only thing that stands between you and them is a detail you barely noticed, a whisper from the deepest, darkest, most vigilant part of your own mind. The aftermath was a different kind of haunting, one not of shadows and whispers, but of stark, clinical light and the endless, looping replay of violation in the theater of my mind. A psychological scar that itched far worse than any physical wound. A constant, low-grade fever of paranoia that made every blank wall a potential canvas for projection. Every innocuous object a suspect in a conspiracy against my privacy. We never went back to that apartment, our belongings left behind like shed skin. The landlord's arrest a cold comfort reported in a brief, sanitized news article that spoke of invasion of privacy, but could never capture the visceral gut punch of seeing that tiny, unblinking eye staring back at me from the ceiling, a sight that is now burned onto my retinas, superimposed over every new room I enter. Sarah and I, bound together by this shared trauma, found ourselves fraying at the edges in the sterile safety of our new rental, a place we had swept for devices with a professional-grade RF detector, a ritual that felt both necessary and deeply sad, a testament to a lost innocence we could never reclaim. Our intimacy, once easy and unself-conscious, became a halting, self-aware performance, our eyes constantly flicking towards the corners of the room, our ears straining for the faint, imagined we're of a lens, the ghost in the machine now replaced by the machine itself, a phantom limb of surveillance that we both still felt. I became an expert in the architecture of intrusion, My formerly skeptical mind now a repository of terrifying knowledge about pinhole cameras hidden in clock radios, power outlets, and even the screws of door hinges. My online search history a bleak map of a newfound expertise in counter-surveillance, a hobby born of sheer terror. I'd find myself staring at the smoke detector in a department store or a hotel room, my heart rate spiking, a cold sweat breaking out on my back, the world having become a vast, potential panopticon where every stranger's glance felt weighted, every casual observation by a clerk or a neighbor potentially predatory. The police had been efficient, their investigation thorough, and Mr. Clay was awaiting trial. But the justice system felt abstract and distant, a slow-moving machine that could never truly erase the footage that existed somewhere, if only on an evidence locker hard drive. The knowledge that images of us, at our most vulnerable, had been captured and stored by a predatory gaze was a poison that seeped into everything. Sarah started therapy, but I resisted, clinging to the grim satisfaction of my own vigilance, my salvation having come from my own mind, a fact that was both empowering and isolating, making me trust my own perceptions less and yet rely on them more, a maddening paradox. I started having dreams, not of cameras or of Mr. Clay's guilty face, but of the Ouija board itself, the heart-shaped planchette moving under my fingers. But in the dreams, it wasn't spelling words. It was pointing a single, unwavering plastic finger aimed at the most mundane of objects, a new toothbrush holder, a bookshelf, the toaster, and I'd wake up in a panic, convinced that my subconscious was trying to flag another threat, that I had missed something, that we were still being watched. This, I realized, was the true and lasting horror, the psychological fallout that was far more effective and insidious than any jump scare a ghost could provide. It was the utter demolition of my sense of security, the knowledge that my own home was a concept that could be so easily violated, and the even more terrifying knowledge that the world is full of Mr. Clays, men with bland faces and access to cheap technology, for whom other people's lives are just entertainment to be consumed. The story had a neat ending for the authorities, a predator caught, evidence seized. But for us, there was no ending, only a perpetual present tense of anxiety, a life sentence of looking over our shoulders, of double-checking locks, of seeing a story like ours on the news and feeling not shock, but a grim, weary recognition. The Ouija board sits in a box in our new basement, and sometimes I think about burning it, this object that was the conduit for such a profound violation, but I can't bring myself to do it, because as much as it reminds me of the horror, it also reminds me of the salvation, a message in a bottle from the deepest, most ancient part of my own brain, the part that is always on watch, the part that saw the predator's shadow a split second before my conscious mind did. So I leave it there, a relic of the before time, and I try to live in the after, a world that is permanently tilted, its colors a little duller, its sounds a little sharper, every quiet moment a question mark, every safe feeling a temporary illusion. The chilling truth being that a detail I barely noticed saved us from a predator, and I am now condemned to a life of noticing every detail, every smudge, every misplaced angle, forever waiting for the next whisper from the dark, vigilant parts of my own mind. The paranoia, once a sharp, stabbing fear, has now dulled into a chronic condition, a constant hum in the background of my life like the persistent buzz of a faulty fluorescent light. Something you never quite get used to but learn to ignore for stretches of time until it suddenly flares back into unbearable focus. We've settled into a routine in this new city, a life built on a foundation of scanned frequencies and regularly scheduled sweeps of our apartment. A ritual that Sarah performs with a quiet, grim efficiency that breaks my heart. The woman who once believed in gentle spirits, now an expert in the cold hardware of voyeurism. I find myself studying people now, not with curiosity, but with a cold, analytical eye, searching for the telltale signs of a predator, the lingering glance, the false smile, the overly familiar question, seeing potential Mr. Clays in every landlord, every maintenance man, every stranger on the bus who looks a moment too long. My worldview permanently skewed. The world repopulate not with fellow humans, but with a spectrum of potential threats. My work has suffered. I used to be a graphic designer, my mind filled with colors and layouts, but now my creativity feels stunted, choked by the gray dust of suspicion. My sketches filled with hidden angles and disembodied eyes, concepts I have to scrap and start over, my portfolio becoming a strange, bleak reflection of my internal state. Sarah and I, we still love each other, but it's a love that has been tempered in a fire of shared trauma, a bond that is incredibly strong yet fragile in its own way, because we are each other's constant reminder of what happened, a living archive of the violation. And sometimes I catch her looking at me with a sadness, so profound it feels like a physical weight, and I know she sees the same in my eyes. We don't talk about the baby anymore, the one we had started vaguely planning for in the old apartment, in the bedroom with the morning light, that dream shelved indefinitely. The idea of bringing a child into a world where we can't even guarantee the sanctity of its own nursery, feeling like the height of irresponsible naivete. Instead, we have adopted a dog, a large, shaggy mutt with a loud bark, a living alarm system whose presence is a comfort not for its affection, but for its territorial instinct, another layer in our security protocol. I've started running long, punishing routes through the city, not for health, but for exhaustion, striving to reach a state of physical fatigue so complete that my mind has no choice but to shut down, to grant me a few precious hours of dreamless sleep. But even then, the feeling of eyes on me sometimes pierces through the exhaustion, and I'll spin around, my heart hammering, only to find an empty street, the sensation so vivid it feels more real than the pavement beneath my feet. The trial date for Mr. Clay has been pushed back again, a procedural delay that feels like a fresh insult, a constant reopening of a wound that never truly heals, and we are told we will have to testify, to sit in a room and describe the intimate moments he stole, to give voice to the violation for a jury of strangers, a prospect that fills me with a dread that is somehow colder and more clinical than the initial discovery. I sometimes try to access the feeling of the person I was before, the skeptic who laughed off a Ouija board, the man who felt at home in his own skin, in his own space. But that man feels like a character from a book I read long ago, his concerns and his worldview laughably quaint. Now, I am a creature of vigilance, my salvation having become my prison, my greatest strength now my most debilitating weakness, because the part of my mind that saved us is now the part that refuses to stand down, that sees patterns in randomness and threats in shadows, a faithful guard dog that will not stop barking. The true horror was never the camera itself, nor even the man who put it there. The true, lasting horror is the irreversible rewiring of my own brain, the knowledge that the world is not safe, that trust is a luxury I can no longer afford, and that the closest I will ever come to peace again is the tense, watchful silence between moments of fear. I keep the Ouija board, not in the basement, but in my office closet, a decision I made one night in a fit of what I can only describe as grim acceptance. I see it not as a toy or a relic, but as a tool, a stark reminder that the most important messages we receive don't come from the beyond, but from the deep, dark, and terrifyingly perceptive within, and that while a detail I barely noticed saved us from a predator, the price of that salvation was the loss of the simple, unexamined life, a trade I would make again in a heartbeat, but one whose cost I will be paying for every single day that remains. The seasons have turned a full cycle since we fled, the vibrant decay of autumn giving way to the brittle silence of winter, and now to the tentative, false spring outside our new window. A cycle that in another life would have felt like renewal, but now feels merely like the passage of time, a countdown to nothing. Our lives have become a study in managed anxiety, a series of carefully constructed routines designed to mimic normalcy, while building ever higher walls against the unseen. Our home a fortress whose primary enemy is the memory of its own violation. Sarah has taken up gardening on our small balcony, her hands, which once trembled holding a planchette, now digging firmly in the soil, nurturing seedlings with a fierce, protective focus that I understand completely. This small act of creation a defiant bulwark against the destructive impulse we encountered. I watch her sometimes from the window, her face calm in concentration, and for a fleeting moment, I can almost believe we have carved out a pocket of safety, But then my eyes, against my will, drift upwards to the soffit of the adjacent building, scanning for any anomaly, any glint of glass that shouldn't be there, the moment shattered. My work has taken a pragmatic turn. I've moved from creative design to more technical, UI-focused projects, finding a strange solace in the cold logic of code and user pathways. A world where everything has a defined function, and there are no hidden variables, a stark contrast to the messy, unpredictable horror of human intention. We received a formal notice last week, a thick envelope from the district attorney's office, detailing the final plea bargain Mr. Clay had accepted, avoiding a public trial in exchange for a guilty plea and a sentence that felt both satisfyingly long and utterly insufficient, a numerical value that could never quantify the damage done. There will be no courtroom testimony, no reliving the discovery under cross-examination, a relief so profound it left me physically weak, but also with a strange sense of anticlimax, as if the monster had been vanquished offstage, leaving us with the aftermath but without the catharsis of the final battle. The news should have been a closing door, but instead it feels like a door left slightly ajar, the draft from it keeping the air in our lives perpetually cold. I find myself compulsively searching his name online, not for new information, but almost as a form of self-flagellation, needing to see his bland, smiling face from an old professional website to remind myself he was real, that it happened, that the source of the poison was a specific, captured man, and not some free-floating evil I need to guard against in every stranger. This habit, I know, is unhealthy, a scratch on a wound that needs to heal, but the compulsion is stronger than the knowledge. The Ouija board's message, which once felt like a foreign intrusion, has now been fully internalized. It is the operating system of my psyche, a single looping command watching. It is the first thought upon waking, a quick, inventorying glance around the room, and the last before sleep, a final check of the door locks and the familiar landscape of our bedroom ceiling. The horror has not faded. It has metabolized, becoming a part of my cellular makeup. The initial shock transformed into a permanent state of heightened awareness, a survival mechanism that has outlived its immediate purpose and now threatens to consume the host. The great, chilling irony is that Mr. Clay, from his cell, has achieved a perverse form of what he sought. He is still watching, not through a lens, but through the lasting distortion he etched onto our perception, his gaze forever embedded in the way I see the world, a ghost in the machine of my own mind. The story never really ends, you see. It just changes form, the overt threat receding to be replaced by the subtler, more enduring terror of the aftermath. The knowledge that the world is both exactly as it seems and infinitely more dangerous, and that the price of safety is eternal vigilance, a wearying, lonely vigil that I will keep, not because I want to, but because the alternative, the unthinkable, blissful trust of before, is a country to which I can never return. The guilt is a newer, quieter companion to the paranoia, a slow-dripping poison that comes not from anything I did, but from what I have unwittingly done to Sarah from the life I have indirectly sculpted for us out of fear and suspicion. I see it in the way she sometimes catches herself humming an old tune, a fragment from the before time, only for the sound to die abruptly in her throat as if she's committed a breach of protocol, her eyes flickering to me to see if I've noticed, if I disapprove of this momentary lapse in our shared vigilance. Our love is a fortress, yes, but it is a fortress under a perpetual gray sky, the air inside thick with the unsaid, with the memories we dare not invoke for fear of giving them more power. I have made her a refugee in her own life, and this knowledge is a heavier burden than the watchfulness itself. We tried to have a normal evening last week, a dinner at a new restaurant someone from her work had recommended, a deliberate attempt to step off the defensive grid we've built around ourselves. The restaurant was loud and vibrant, a cacophony of clattering plates and overlapping conversations that should have been a welcome shield. But I spent the entire meal with my back to the wall, my eyes cataloging every patron, every waiter, every reflective surface that could potentially conceal a lens, my body tense and humming with a nervous energy that made the food taste like ash. Sarah watched me over the candlelight, and I saw the hope slowly extinguish in her eyes, replaced by a weary resignation that was worse than any accusation. She didn't say anything. She just reached across the table and squeezed my hand, a gesture of pity that felt like a condemnation. We left before dessert, the silence in the car ride home a physical presence, a third passenger comprised entirely of our shared failure. This is the true legacy of the camera in the smoke detector. It's not the footage itself, which is likely locked away in an evidence room, but the metastasis of doubt it triggered, a cancer that has spread from that one room to every aspect of our existence, poisoning simple pleasures and turning every potential joy into a potential threat. I have begun to have a recurring dream not of being watched, but of being the watcher, of standing in a dark room before a wall of monitors, each screen showing a different intimate scene from a stranger's life. And on one of the screens is us, in our old bedroom, laughing in the sunlight, and I try to turn the monitor off, to give us back our privacy, but I can't find the switch, and I realize with a dawning horror that the face of the watcher in the dream is my own. I wake from these dreams gasping, my own capacity for observation, the very thing that saved us, feeling like a curse, a predatory trait. The line between victim and perpetrator feels terrifyingly thin, as if the act of witnessing the violation has somehow infected me with its essence. The world has become a text to be decoded for hidden menaces, and I am its anxious, exhausted scholar, forever translating the benign into the suspicious, forever hearing the echo of that single prophetic word, watching, not as a warning from beyond, but as the central, inescapable directive of my own ruined peace. There is no going back, only this endless, circular path forward through a landscape that is forever altered, where every shadow holds a camera and every silence is filled with the faint, imagined sound of a recording device whirring to life.